Hello everyone! Welcome to Chapter 5, Cognitive Perspectives, where we'll be exploring some of the major theories within cognitive psychology and how they shape our understanding of learning. This chapter provides a foundation for understanding how students think, process information, and engage with content. By understanding these cognitive perspectives, we can create learning experiences that are not only more effective but also meaningful for students. So, let's dive in and discover what cognitive theories have to offer for learning-centered teaching. Let's start with an overview of what we'll be covering in this chapter. We'll go through several key cognitive theories and concepts that play a central role in education. These include Gestalt theory and its principles, which focus on how we perceive and organize information as whole concepts. Next, insight learning, which looks at how sudden realizations or aha moments contribute to problem solving. Lewin's life space theory, which examines how our environment and relationships shape our learning experiences. Information processing, which explains the stages of how we take in, store, and retrieve information. We'll also discuss different types of knowledge, the stages of information, processing, Gagne's conditions of learning, Ausubel's meaningful learning, the spiral curriculum, and discovery learning. Each theory offers a unique perspective on how students can learn, process information, and retain knowledge. Understanding these theories can help us as educators develop strategies that truly support the learning process. Cognitive perspectives focus on the mental processes involved in learning, unlike behaviorism, which emphasizes observable actions and responses. Cognitive theories delve into the mental mechanisms behind learning, things like perception, memory, problem solving, and comprehension. In other words, cognitive perspectives are interested in what happens inside the mind when we learn something new. These theories are critical because they help us understand how students absorb information, make sense of it, and eventually use it in real-life situations. As teachers, recognizing these processes allows us to tailor our approaches to make learning not only more engaging but also more meaningful and lasting. Many theories have contributed to cognitive perspectives, but some of the most influential figures include John Piaget and Jerome Bruner. Piaget is known for his theory of cognitive development, where he argued that knowledge is constructed through active engagement with the world. According to Piaget, students learn best when they are allowed to explore, question, and adapt their understanding based on his new experiences. Brunner, on the other hand, introduced the concept of a spiral curriculum, where students revisit topics at increasingly complex levels. He also advocated for discovery learning, which emphasizes active engagement with material. These theories teach us that learning should not be passive. Instead, students should actively build upon what they already know to deepen their understanding. Applying their ideas helps us create a learning environment that is both challenging and supportive. Let's start with letter A, which is Gestalt theory. It was developed by Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kofka. It focuses on how we perceive things as whole units rather than just a collection of individual parts. According to Gestalt theory, the mind tends to organize information into patterns or wholes that make sense to us. This approach has implications for teaching, as it suggests that presenting information in a meaningful context can help students grasp the larger concept before focusing on specific details. For instance, When teaching a complex novel like Noli Me Tangere, you might start by discussing the central themes and setting, allowing students to understand the story's impact. Once they have a grasp the whole narrative, you can then dive into analyzing specific chapters or characters. Gestalt theory reminds us that the whole is often more powerful than just some of its parts. Let us now proceed with letter B. Gestalt theory also includes specific principles that explain how our minds organize information both visually and conceptually, which is the Gestalt principle. These principles include proximity. When we say proximity, we group items that are close together as related. Similarity, we connect items that look alike. Closure, our minds complete incomplete information, filling in the gaps. Figure grounded. We distinguish between important elements, the figure, and the background. As educators or future educators, we can use these principles to structure lessons in ways that are naturally make sense to students. For example, organizing vocabulary words by themes or categories like family terms can help students notice patterns and group similar concepts together. By applying these principles, we make it easier for students to connect and retain information. Letter C, which is insight learning. Wolfgang Kohler's insight learning is a cognitive process where understanding or solution to a problem suddenly clicks. This type of learning is often associated with problem solving and is characterized by the famous aha or light bulb moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Kohler's research, particularly his experiments with chimpanzees, demonstrated that insight learning happens when we connect prior knowledge with new observations. For students, this means that struggling and exploring different approaches can lead to a sudden realization or deepened understanding. For instance, a student learning complex verb conjugations in Filipino might initially find it confusing but could suddenly understand the pattern after repeated exposure. Insight learning is valuable because these moments of clarity often lead to long-term retention and understanding. Letter D, which is life space by Lewin. Kurt Lewin's life space theory suggests that each learner's behavior and experiences are shaped by their unique environment, personal experiences, and relationships. In his view, both internal and external factors affect how we learn and interact. Lewin believed that students are motivated by their perceptions and feelings about the world around them, meaning that learning is influenced by social, emotional, and environmental factors. As teachers, this theory reminds us to create a supportive and inclusive environment where students feel valued. For example, students from rural backgrounds might connect more deeply with stories or lessons that reflect their own experiences, like local folk tales. By making learning relevant to their life space, we can engage students more effectively. Letter D, information processing. The information processing model proposed by Atkinson and Schriffen describes learning in terms of how information is encoded, stored, and retrieved. This model compares the mind to a computer that processes data through different stages. First, information is encoded when we first encounter it. Then, it is stored in memory, and finally, it is retrieved when needed. This model highlights that each stage is crucial for effective learning. As teachers, we can apply this by organizing information in a way that aids memory, providing practice to reinforce storage, and using activities that encourage retrieval. For example, when you introduce new vocabulary with clear examples, practicing it regularly and then testing it later can help ensure students remember and can use the words when needed. Let's now move on to letter F, which is types of knowledge. Anderson and Cratwell identify three main types of knowledge, which are declarative, procedural, and conditional. Let's talk about declarative knowledge. Knowing facts or information like the definition of each term. Procedural knowledge, knowing how to do something like solving math problems. Conditional knowledge, knowing when and why to apply certain information, which guides strategic decision making. In teaching, each type of knowledge plays a role. Declarative forms the foundation, procedural knowledge allows for application, and conditional knowledge enables students to make thoughtful choices. For example, a lesson on grammar on Filipino grammar might start with defining the rules or the declarative, practicing sentence construction, the procedural, and discussing where or when certain structures are more appropriate. That's the conditional. By addressing all this or all three types will help students develop a comprehensive understanding. Letter G, stages of information processing. Learning according to information processing theory happens in three stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. During encoding, students are introduced to new material and begin forming connections. Next, in the storage stage, the information is consolidated into memory. Finally, retrieval involves addressing this information when it's needed, like during a test or in real-world situations. Teachers can enhance each stage for encoding, present content clearly and meaningfully. For storage, provide repeated practice, and for retrieval, include quizzes and discussions. For instance, after reading a Filipino poem, ask students to summarize it, discuss it, and later recall its themes. These activities ensure students are more likely to remember the material over time. Letter H, Robert Gagne proposed that different types of learning such as verbal, motor, or cognitive strategies require specific conditions for success. This is for Gagne's condition of learning. For example, learning to speak in Filipino requires different instructional methods than learning how to write formally. Gagne's model suggests that each type of learning benefits from tailored strategies, like using repetition, practice, and feedback. For instance, teaching students to write formal letters involves explaining the structure, verbal, giving time to practice, which is the motor skills, and providing feedback, which is the cognitive strategy. By considering these conditions, we can support various learning types and help students succeed in different areas. Let's now proceed with letter I, categories of learning. Gagne also identified categories of learning including verbal information, intellectual skills, and cognitive strategies. Verbal information is factual knowledge. Intellectual skills involve applying knowledge, and cognitive strategies help students think and learn. Teachers should aim to balance these categories to foster well-rounded development. For example, when teaching Filipino idioms, we might start with definitions, like the verbal information, use them in sentences, like the intellectual skills, and encourage students to create stories using idioms, that is for cognitive strategies. This approach ensures that students don't just learn the facts but also apply and understand them in various contexts. For letter J, events of instruction, Gagne outlined 9 instructional events to help teachers structure effective lessons. These events guide each stage of the lesson, from capturing students' attention to promoting retention. The 9 events include gaining attention, starting with something engaging like a question or an interesting video clip. Number 2, informing learners of objectives, telling students what they learn or what they will learn and why is it important. Number 3, stimulating recall of prior learning, helping students connect new material to what they already know. Number 4, presenting the content, introducing new material in a clear, organized way. Number 5, providing learning guidance, giving hints or examples to support understanding. 6, eliciting performance, asking students to demonstrate their understanding. 7, providing feedback, offering corrections and praise to guide learning. 8, assessing performance, use tests or activities to evaluate understanding. Last, number 9, enhancing retention and transfer. Encouraging, encouraging students to apply what they've learned in new contexts. An example might be showing a famous movie clip to gain attention, then processing lesson or on Filipino dialects, and ending with a group discussion for feedback and reinforcement. By following these events, teachers can design lessons that engage and support students at every step. Let's now proceed with letter K, Ausubel's meaningful learning or the subsumption theory. David Ausubel's theory of meaningful learning suggests that students learn best when they can connect new information with what they already know. He introduced the idea of advanced organizers, tools used before the lesson begins to help students link new concepts with prior knowledge. Meaningful learning, as Osobel argued, is not about memorizing facts, but about understanding and internalizing new information in a way that makes sense to the learner. For instance, before introducing Filipino mythology, a teacher might use a graphic organizer comparing mythology with popular fantasy stories. This gives students a framework and makes the new material feel more familiar and relevant. By using Ausubel's approach, we can make learning more effective and lasting. Another is letter L, meaningful reception of information. According to Osabel, learning is most effective when students are actively engaged in processing and understanding information. Simply listening or passively receiving information is not enough. Students need to organize and relate new information to their own experiences. This idea underscores the importance of interactive discussions and activities in the classroom. For example, instead of merely reading a Filipino short story to the class, we can ask students to connect the story's theme to a personal experience or an event from their community. This approach helps students internalize the story's message and fosters a deeper, more personal understanding. 4 purposes of meaningful learning. Meaningful learning serves 4 essential purposes. It promotes better understanding, retention, application, and problem solving skills. When students engage in meaningful learning, they are more likely to retain and apply what they've learned in various contexts. For example, rather than focusing on solely on memorizing Philippine historical events, meaningful learning encourages students to understand the significance of these events and their impact on modern Filipino identity. This approach helps students retain information longer, connect it to real life situations, and think critically about the material. Letter N, Advanced Organizer. Advanced organizers are powerful tools for introducing new material by providing students with a preview or structure before diving into a lesson. Advanced organizers help them connect new information with what they already know. This makes it easier for students to organize, process, and retain the material. For example, before discussing Noli Me Tangere, a teacher could use a graphic organizer that highlights key themes, characters, and historical context. This approach gives students a framework to understand the novel's complexity and helps them see the relationships between its elements. Let's now proceed in letter O, the spiral curriculum. Jerome Bruner introduced the concept of a spiral curriculum, where students revisit key concepts multiple times throughout their education. Each time a topic is revisited, it's explored in greater depth or with added complexity. This approach allows students to reinforce their understanding over time and connect new learning with what they already know. For instance, the students might learn Filipino folktales in elementary school, then revisit these tales in high school to analyze their cultural significance. In college, they might study how these stories evolved in contemporary Filipino literature. This method deepens understanding and builds connections across different educational levels. Letter P, Discovery Learning. Jerome Bruner's discovery learning is an instructional method that encourages students to explore and discover information on their own. Instead of providing direct answers, teachers guide students to learn through hands-on activities, experiments, or problem-solving tasks. Discovery learning fosters curiosity and motivation as students are actively involved in their learning process. For example, in a Filipino literature class, students could engage in a discovery activity by researching Philippine literary forms like the balagtasan, a poetic debate, or haiku. They might then create their own versions exploring the cultural context and meaning behind their work. This approach helps students connect with the material personally, promoting deeper understanding and retention. That concludes our chapter 5, which is the cognitive perspectives. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned a lot in our discussion today. So don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe in our YouTube channel. Bye-bye.